Hi, Misha here, and let's talk about the secondary starships of Starfleet, the Federation, from the J.J.Verse. Okay, quick, don't turn off. Yeah, I'm gonna say some interesting things, I hope, both positive and negative about these designs. Do a little comparing, talk about some old school kit bashing, because now we have 3 examples, pretty much all of them from Eaglemoss, and they're in the standard size, which I like. We have the Newton class or type. We have the Armstrong class or type. And we have the Mayflower class or type. So let's talk about their individual roles, what they did, what I like, what I don't like about them, and maybe I'll rank them a little bit. And we'll also compare them with the Kelvin, sometimes called the Einstein class. Now, the Kelvin type or Einstein class here is part of their special line, so the medium size. Not huge, but not small. It's alright. And we'll see several elements repeated with the other ships. In the movie, this was the first to appear. So we have this type of secondary hull with the deflector in the front, shuttle bay in the back, and a very long single nacelle on the bottom. And I refuse to say that actual physical thrust comes out of the back. But I will admit that it could be part of like a chiller grill, because if you look at, say, the Galaxy class, the Constitution 2, they have things in the back of the nacelles, so I can accept it as long as it's not physically pushing the ship. And we do have what look to be impulse engines at the back of the saucer anyway. And this is far from our first single nacelle ship. We'll talk about it throughout. I just wanted to bring it out as a comparison. Here we have the Newton type or class. This was the first one I received, although ironically, it was the last one that Eaglemoss put on their website for pre-order. And they actually shipped me 2 of them because they made a mistake. Instead of sending me one of these and a Valiant, they actually sent me 2. And eventually I had to wait for the Valiant. But I did a video on that recently, the Defiant concept. There we go. This is classed as a heavy cruiser. In fact, it was the workhorse of Starfleet. It's essentially what the Constitution replaced. It's about 315 meters long, at least with realistic measurements. And it was introduced around 2200, so about half a century before the Connie. And it actually does have some kind of neat design elements taken from older starships. This was designed for exploration, mapping. They did a lot of star mapping, deep space. It's pretty well rounded. It's quite fast, especially when introduced. It's reasonably well armed, but not a battleship. We don't really know the exact crew on this ship, but based on a couple of other snippets of data from other ships, let's say 350. Why not? But let's take it off here. Fits under the stand quite well. It is unusual, but it kind of grows on you. First off, let's talk about the saucer, or rather half saucer. This actually plays in real well to the Intrepid from Enterprise and gives it that older Starfleet feel. It could be said that maybe this was their return to the saucer after playing around with the sphere of the Daedalus class. bridge here. Actually, because they're using essentially the same components as the Kelvin, we can pretty easily estimate at least relative size. And we have these two pretty typical warp engines. Again, if we don't accept that this is thrust coming out of the back, if we just say, like I said, it's a chiller grill exhaust of like excess heat or excess plasma, I can accept that, because if you look at the early cage type Enterprise, there's stuff back here. Otherwise, the nacelles are pretty TOS-y, and then the front is very much so with the, I guess we'll call them Bassard collectors. If only they were red. And we have various connective tissue here, including a pod up here, which is actually very reminiscent of the NX class. Of course, on the NX, it was a small kind of star drive section, or secondary hull. This may be a modular pod. Flipping around, we have kind of an extension back here, probably for more engineering. And then we have twin secondary hulls hanging down, which at first I thought was kind of odd. Okay, having two shuttle bays, redundant shuttle bays, makes sense, especially at a time when maybe transporters weren't in use as much. But why two deflector dishes? That seems odd. Actually, there's a little bit of canon to support it. If you look at older starships from the late 22nd and early 23rd centuries, like the J-type or J-class, it too has two deflectors. It seems like there was a time when maybe they didn't have enough power output from each deflector, or maybe they just like the redundancy for a deep space craft. Redundancy is quite good. So this is an aging design by 2250, 2260, but we see them in most of the J.J. films. We'll talk more about that and the Battle of the Vulcan at the end when we kind of go over a final analysis. Let's move on. The Mayflower type or class. Actually, this just came in today, and I was holding off doing this video until I had all of these. This is considered a frigate or light cruiser. Now, our Newton over here, what did I put her? I don't know, I guess I put it over here. Yeah, anyway. Our Newton, like I said, was a deep space explorer, all-around rounded ship. Good speed, decent defense and offense, meant to do a lot of that stuff. The type here, the Mayflower, was not designed especially for combat, although it could defend itself, and it wasn't designed for deep space exploration or long-term missions. This was designed to be kind of the workhorse of the fleet, which makes sense because it resembles, of most of anything, a Miranda, which is kind of the workhorse we know. And we know that at least a variant of the Miranda was in service in the TOS Prime timeline. Quite simple and straightforward. We have two Kelvin-style nacelles. No engineering hull as such. A full-sized saucer. Have a little bit of a raised area in the back on that kind of a spine here, which leads to impulse engines. A simple, straightforward design. This was meant to be a patrol ship, like, for example, the Romulan Neutral Zone, a conveyance, a cargo ship, a transport ship. It was also meant to be kind of a rapid response assistance ship, planetary assistance, supplies, just kind of well-rounded to do lots of things. To that end, it had quite a bit of leftover space in the saucer. It's about 236 meters long, so a good bit shorter than the Newton, but not teeny tiny. That's about like a Miranda. Again, simple and straightforward. forward. It was introduced a few years after the Newton, say, 2210, give or take. Just kind of doing its thing, and you can certainly see the resemblance to a Kelvin. In fact, on the side view, it looks like a Kelvin with the top section taken off, and you can kind of tell it's a larger scale because of the more detail to the bridge here compared with our Kelvin. In fact, these are pretty close in scale. The Kelvin itself is about 315 meters. So a pretty good sized ship. And it was actually, the Kelvin, introduced as a deep space explorer and science ship. Also sometimes used as a medical ship or colony ship or colony resupply ship. And again, it's not our first Starfleet ship to only have one nacelle, the Freedom class, the Saladin class. But it's actually the first to have one nacelle and an engineering hull up top, which houses the shuttle bay, which is a good chunk of it, and the deflector, which makes sense for a deep space ship. No, I think the Kelvin actually works out pretty well, all things considered. And it's reasonably well armed. It has turreted phasers and photons, which again, for an exploration ship, is probably one of the more heavily armed science ships. Whereas this again is just more flying around the Federation, doing around the Federation things like Miranda. Yeah. And our next ship kind of combines the two. The Armstrong type or class. See what I mean? Kind of combines the two. This is a medium cruiser. And so it's in kind of the same vein as like a Nebula, or the Miranda itself too, but a more well-appointed version. It's a little bit longer, at about 254 meters. And this is the one we actually get a crew count on of just over 200. And it's kind of interesting. It has a slightly smaller internal volume for the saucer. It has some cutouts in the back here, kind of reminiscent of the Newton. But this is probably one of the later ones in the series, put into service around 2215. They're kind of borrowing elements from other ones. We have a roll bar on top here. It's possible this was modular. Maybe it holds torpedoes or a sensor suite or something else. It also makes up for the cutouts in the saucer a bit. And the two side nacelles make perfect sense. And we have seen one or two 3 nacelle ships like the Niagara before. But what sets this apart is the center is longer than the other two. So essentially, it's a Mayflower type, but with a roll bar and 3 nacelles and a cutout saucer. Yeah, a little interesting. This was designed for deep space operations. It was actually designed, and at the time was the fastest in the fleet. It was better armed than the Mayflower type. So more combat oriented, more defense oriented, but not strictly speaking that. It was just kind of combining features and being everywhere they could be. And kind of the pinnacle of this era of technology, I would say. So, what about the ships themselves, where have we seen them? What about the battle over Vulcan? And what do I think about each one? Pros and cons. We see all three of these in all three of the J.J. films, and usually numbers between 1 and 3. And of course we saw the Kelvin, but I think we only saw that in the opening of the first film. It was not, or at least a ship of this class was not featured in the battle of Vulcan, or for Vulcan, or over Vulcan, or what have you. Who was? Well, 8 ships were launched, one of them being the Enterprise, so 7 of the old generation. And those would have been the Truman, the Walcott, the Farragut, the Antares, because it's Star Trek, so we have to have an Antares, and the Hood. There was also a Newton type, probably the USS Newton herself, and an Armstrong type, either the USS Armstrong or the USS Chaffee. So that's the 5 ships. You know, you might think the Newton, the Newton is named after Isaac Newton. It's actually named after the Fig Newton. And as for the Mayflower, it's actually not named for the Pilgrim's ship. It's literally named for a flower in May. And finally, of course, the Armstrong is not named for Neil Armstrong. That would be silly. It's actually named for Louis Armstrong, because this is the J.J.Verse. That's how things roll. It's quite possible that the USS Hood was a Newton type, which makes some sense because the Hood in TOS was a Connie. Well, if in 2250s this is what they were replacing with Connies, they would probably decommission ships and do that. So I like that. The Farragut we hear in the real TOS era. Kurt served aboard it, but it was seemingly a smaller ship. So it could have been either a Mayflower or an Armstrong type. But since it seems such an average workaday ship, I kind of want to say it might have been a Mayflower type. I don't know. Just kind of seems fitting for the Farragut. Maybe it's because in the Next Generation, the Farragut is Nebula. So maybe we actually should say it's this one. Doesn't matter. They certainly never put much thought into it. But that's okay. So those are the ships, and of course they were immediately destroyed in like 5 minutes by not a top-of-the-line Romulan 24th century warship, which I could have believed, but rather an outdated Romulan mining ship that probably wasn't too much younger than these. It's like, you know, just because something is old, a warship is still a warship. And a mining ship is still a mining ship. I mean, a 21st century cruise liner or oil rig like the Valdez is not going to destroy a World War I battleship, even if, you know, it doesn't ram it. So that's pretty preposterous. Now, if they'd come in and there was a battle, and anyway, I digress. It's very clear that there are not military minds at work in the J.J.Verse, and that's not an uncommon thing. A lot of other sci-fi series are equally guilty, but I digress. Anyway, speaking of me, my video, although you're here, so it's your video too, I suppose. What do I think about them? Pros, cons, and how do I rank them as far as least to most favorite? Okay. Took them off the stands for a little easier access on camera. Starting with the Newton. At first, I was a little about this, but it's really grown on me. The nacelles I'm fine with. They're fine. Again, ignoring the whole wanting to give exhaust type thing. We'll just ignore that. Didn't happen. But at first I thought it was very bizarre to have 2 engineering hulls. And I still think it would probably look better with just one. but I think they were going to make sure no one got confused with other ships. But then, like I said, I remember the J class, the J-type starship, also had 2 deflectors. That made me feel a little better. The roll bar is fine. So I don't have any major complaints, and since I do actually like the Intrepid from Enterprise, I kind of like the half saucer look. It is intentionally clumsy, if that makes sense. It's a little bit of a busy ship. Kind of reminds me of the Constellation, but instead of 4 nacelles, we have 2 and 2. So if you kind of view it like that, it makes sense, and I do kind of like the lines. It definitely seems like them trying to do something new. Moving on to the one that came today, the Mayflower. Yeah, this is a very simple shape. Typical nacelles, a literal saucer. This is the closest that I actually could expect to see in the time of the TOS era, at least in the prime timeline. It seems like something that could have been created, detailing aside, you know, if you took a Connie saucer and they just dropped them on. It's straightforward, simple, and fits in really well. Again, aside from the ends here, I have no complaints. I even kind of think this spine on the back is neat. Kind of industrial. Yeah. No real complaints. And finally, the Armstrong. It very much looks like a Miranda. Or even Nebula. I like the pod. I like kind of the scalloped saucer. It's kind of different. But having 3 nacelles, if you're going to do that, why have one bigger? I think I don't mind. I think I'd still prefer it with just 2. But if you're going to do it, I wish they were all the same length. Or if you really wanted one to protrude further back, okay, move it further back here so it protrudes a little further back compared to these. I think either way would look better. Either making them the same length and being in the same position, or moving this back so it sticks out, but also that means it goes a little further back in there. So I think the center is a little bizarre. I'm not really talking about the Kelvin because it's not really part of our fleet. I mostly just had it out for, you know, showing, exhibiting the 3, because it's a nice set. This is pretty much all of them that we see in the J.J.Verse. Certainly all that were identifiable in the Vulcan fleet. And finally, we end with them lined up in my order, my pick. Number 3, the Armstrong, which is a shame because it's probably my favorite name. In the middle at number 2, the Newton. And number 1, the Mayflower, which is funny because it's my least favorite name for a starship. Honestly, Mayflower would almost be a better name for the Kelvin. If it were a colony ship anyway. Like I said, I have a hard time with the Armstrong and the weird nacelle. I just don't, from a logistic standpoint, why would you have a nacelle that was different from the other ones? If you need 3 for redundancy operations, you'd want to be able to swap them out. I don't know. Kind of bugs me a little bit. And it's probably my least favorite saucer. Even though I kind of like the scalloping in the back, it does seem kind of pointless to have a void there for no reason. Whereas at least on the Newton here, being a half saucer and how it's kind of skeletonized in the back makes sense with how busy everything is. It's like they wanted to move as much out of the primary hull as they could, maybe for safety or maintenance. It's like they just were in the middle of surgery on the ship and everything was stripped out. It's pretty neat, but it is a little busy, and I'm still not 100% sold on the 2 deflectors thing, even though I can kind of make room for it in my headcanon. Still, though, pretty neat. And I think it's a worthy predecessor to the Constitution. And finally, yeah, I just keep thinking of as the Miranda, the Mayflower type. It's just so straightforward, simple, and it seems like it would fit into Prime TOS the best. And even though I'm not officially putting it in, if I had to rank the Kelvin, I would probably put it as number 2. I like it quite a bit. I still like the Mayflower more, but I think the Kelvin is the next best. But since they're different scales and it wasn't in the fleet, it's not official. And keep in mind, whereas the J.J. Enterprise is new, these all would have been in service in the Prime timeline, at least in theory, because they were all produced initially before 2233, when the Narada destroyed the Kelvin. One other fun thing, all 4 on the table here, every one of them I like better than the J.J. Prize. Certainly the first version of the J.J. Prize we got. Mostly just because I like the nacelle on this. Again, except for the thrust on the end. That's the only bloop against it. And nothing else about the J.J. Prize is really bad except for the nacelles and the pylons for it. The saucer's good. Star drive's okay. But it's funny and kind of sad when your hero ship is the shittiest one of them all. Again, especially in 2009. Yeah, I wanted to show you the complete fleet. I do like that they did it, and I am super happy they didn't try to do it in the special edition. That would be stupid to pay that much money, but if we're paying the regular price, especially if you buy these on a holiday sale, I think I used 4th of July coupons for these. That's how long it took to come in. So I wanted to share them with you. Let me know what you think, and we'll go from there. If you could, please like, share, subscribe, all that fun, good stuff. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.